Hello and welcome. You're watching News Mobile with me, Raghavendra Rao. Now, India has decided to extend its nationwide lockdown by 2 more weeks starting the 4th of May. What does this lockdown entail? What is allowed? What is not allowed? There are a lot of questions, and we are attempting to break it down for you what Lockdown 3.0 actually means, what all it entails. So, to begin, let's talk about what all is prohibited throughout the country, irrespective of the zone one may be living in. So, travel by road, interstate travel, rail and air and metro transportation, except categories permitted by the Ministry of Home Affairs guidelines, all those travels are prohibited throughout the country. Educational and training institutions like schools, coaching centers, and colleges will remain shut throughout the country during this 2 week extension of the lockdown. Hospitality services, including hotels and restaurants, too, will remain closed. Complete prohibition on the opening up of hotels and restaurants. Places of large gatherings like gyms, theaters, malls, bars, etc., they will continue to remain closed. Religious and social and political gatherings as well, they too will not be allowed across the country during the enforcement of Lockdown 3.0. Also, movement of people between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. for non essential activities is completely barred. Now let's come to the red zone. There are a lot of questions about what all is allowed in a red zone, what all is not allowed in a red zone. Now we'll take the prohibited portion first. Now inside a red zone, there are containment zones and there are areas which are non-containment zones. We'll talk about the containment zones first. Now every activity except movement of persons for supply of essential goods and services and for medical emergencies is prohibited. Every activity except essential services are prohibited inside containment zones in a red zone. OPDs and medical clinics too inside containment zones will be prohibited. They will not operate. But in a red zone, what happens outside a containment zone? Now, plying of rickshaws, taxis, buses, barber shops, spas, etc., that too will remain prohibited in a red zone. Now, there are a lot of questions, particularly about whether barber shops and salons can open in Lockdown 3.0. But if you are staying in a red zone, even if you are outside a containment zone, you will not be able to get any access to a barber shop or a salon because those activities are completely barred. Also, the plying of rickshaws, taxis, and buses outside containment zones but within red zones is completely prohibited. And that leaves us with the question as to what is allowed outside a containment zone in red zone then. So there the division is between urban areas and rural areas. We'll take the urban areas first. Now in a red zone outside containment zones, several things have been allowed. These include movement of people or vehicles for permitted activities, industrial establishments in urban areas like SEZs, manufacturing of essential goods like drugs, medical devices, etc., and their supply chain, manufacturing of IT hardware, jute industry, construction, if the workers are residing on the site, that is allowed outside a containment zone in a red zone. Now, standalone shops, shops in neighborhoods, and residential complexes for essential and non-essential items outside of containment zones in a red zone will be allowed to open. E-commerce activities for essential goods will be allowed. Private offices with 33% strength will be allowed. Operations of homes for senior citizens, children, destitutes, etc., those will be allowed outside containment zones in red zones. Also, government offices and emergency health, sanitation, and security services will be allowed outside of containment zones in red zones. Now, when it comes to rural areas, all industrial and construction activities, all shops except in shopping malls, all agriculture, animal husbandry, and plantation activities, all health services, financial sector including banks, NBFCs, etc., public utilities, courier and postal services, print, electronic media, IT and IT enabled services, warehouses, services by self employed persons, except barbers. All of these things will be allowed in rural areas outside containment zones in red zones. Now, we'll come to the orange zone next. Now, what is not permitted in an orange zone? Now, inter and intra district plying of buses, except those which are permitted by the Ministry of Home Affairs, that inter and intra district plying of buses will not be allowed even in orange zones. So, what then is allowed in orange zones? Now, all activities permitted in red zone outside the containment zone, those activities are allowed in orange zones as well. Taxi operation with driver and two passengers is allowed. Inter-district movement of people and vehicles for permitted activities will be allowed in orange zones. Four-wheelers with two passengers with driver rather, and pillion riding on a two-wheeler will be allowed in an orange zone. And when we come to the green zones, well, all activities are allowed except those which are prohibited across the country. But despite all these clarifications, despite so much having been said about what is allowed, what is not allowed, there still remain a lot of questions in the minds of people. Now, a question which comes to mind immediately is that will domestic helps be allowed to come to work? Now, the order says that non-essential travel between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. is not allowed throughout the country during the imposition of lockdown 3.0. An interpretation of this order says, it can lead one to think that this may mean that maids may be allowed to come to houses to work during daytime, that is between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. But those finer details will have to be worked out at the state and the district levels, and that is why states will have to come in and clarify all these doubts on a case-to-case basis. Another question which people often ask is that if movement of people is not allowed between 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., then is movement completely allowed from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.? Well, it is actually going to depend on the city-specific guidelines. The respective state administrations, district administrations will have to take a call, and they will allow certain relaxations. They will have to interpret these rules in their own way, factoring in their own respective circumstances. Now, there are a lot of questions about public transport. Now, if you are living in a red zone, obviously, as we said earlier, you will not be able to get a bus. Cycle rickshaws and auto rickshaws are not allowed in a red zone. Metro trains are banned across the country. In orange zones, as we mentioned, some inter and intra-district bus operations are banned, but some movement is allowed if it is adhering to the MHA guidelines. But movement is allowed in private vehicles with just two passengers besides the driver. And in green zones, buses can operate with up to 50% of seating capacity. Now, another important question which many people are asking and wondering about is that app-based cab aggregators, are they allowed to function during lockdown 3.0? Well, Ola and Uber, the two premier app-based cab aggregators, they will not be allowed in red zones. That is extremely clear. But taxis and cab aggregators are allowed in orange zones, and their services will also be available in green zones. When it comes to the question of will malls or restaurants, will they be open? So as we mentioned a little while back, there is a blanket ban on malls, dine-in restaurants, gymnasiums, theaters, bars, swimming pools. That ban has been in place ever since the lockdown was enforced, and that will continue to stay as it is. Now, as far as the online shopping bit goes, the government order has said that e-commerce is allowed in red zones for essential products alone. In orange and green zones, however, even non-essential items can be ordered through online shopping. Another big question is, of course, as we touched upon a little while back as well, can you go to a salon during lockdown 3.0? Well, if you are in a red zone, obviously you will not be able to go to a salon. And one more point that has been generating quite a discussion amongst people is that are liquor and tobacco products allowed during lockdown 3.0? Well, Home Ministry has said that yes, liquor shops will open across all three zones, red, orange and green, but only standalone liquor shops will function. Shops which are in malls will continue to be closed. So those liquor stores which are located inside shopping malls, they will not function. And also those shops which are selling liquor and tobacco products will have to ensure 6 feet distancing between two people, and they will have to ensure that not more than 5 people are allowed at any given point of time. Now, consumption of liquor, pan, gutka and tobacco in public places is not allowed, and the government has made that very, very clear. Now, if you are still wondering what these zones actually mean, well, red zones are also known as hotspots. These are areas with a high number of COVID-19 cases. To designate a zone as a red zone, the government takes into account the total number of active cases and the number of cases, the doubling rate of the cases before declaring an area a red zone. Currently, there are almost 130 red zones in India. Orange zones are places which are neither in the red nor the green category. They may have fewer cases. Currently, 280 plus districts in India have been classified as orange zones, and green zones are places where no cases have been reported at all, and or where no cases, no fresh cases have come in the past 21 days. So currently there are a total of 319 green zones in the country. And if you're still wondering what a containment zone means, well, places which are within red or orange zones, particularly in red zones, are designated as containment zones where the number of cases is extremely high. Stricter perimeter control is implemented in containment zones. No entry or exit is allowed from these zones. The movement of only essential services personnel is allowed from these containment zones. And most importantly, even OPDs and clinics are not allowed to open in these containment zones. So these are the finer details of what lockdown 3.0 entails. Obviously, a lot of questions are there as India begins its journey into lockdown 3.0 from 4th of May. But yes, we are expecting a lot of state-specific clarification from respective states, and things are only going to get clearer from here onwards. And we at News Mobile will keep bringing you all the latest updates as India enters the third phase of its nationwide lockdown in its battle against COVID-19. Thank you for watching.